came up on the call yesterday at 4 o'clock about some of the issues pertaining to this bill, and I have a short list. I can go through it in probably 7 minutes, and I'm happy to take questions. So I'm going to look at 3 questions. One is, what is net metering? 2 is, why is this biomass not a good idea? And 3rd, what are the principal arguments that the proponent of the bill is making? Net metering is basically a very simple idea. The utility, in this case an electricity utility, gives you a meter that is capable of running backwards. And we never used to have that in this country. The meter only ran forward, and you got billed once a month for the amount that you used, a certain number of cents per kilowatt hour. The idea with net metering is that we want to make it faster to pay back the upfront costs of putting solar on your roof. And if in some hours of the summer, June, July, August, when you're producing more electricity than you can use, and your meter will run backwards, that will help you. The net metering law in the state was written in 2011 because the previous net metering law was incoherent. By incoherent, what I mean is we looked at the statute and a bunch of lawyers and legislators couldn't figure out what the authors might have meant to say. So we had to rewrite it. And when we rewrote it, we specifically, carefully, deliberately included anything that was eligible for renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal. We excluded biomass. We did that on purpose because of the dirtiness, carbon emissions of biomass. I will tell you that when the state's first renewable energy law was passed in 2004, the renewable energy standard, all of the drafts of the bill didn't include biomass as an eligible renewable energy source. And in this building, at midnight in late June in 2004, a compromise was worked out that none of the environmental groups at the time liked that allowed biomass to get in. So that's net metering. What this bill does is it just changes a few words in the 2011 net metering statute to allow, to allow biomass to be eligible for net metering like other cleaner renewable energy sources. So why is burning biomass not such a good idea? That's really the crux of it. Climate Action Rhode Island. So biomass in general produces more carbon for the same quantity of electricity than fossil fuels. We could end there, but we won't. But that addresses the climate issue. There's also more NOx, more nitrous oxides, more volatile organic compounds, more particulate matter that contributes to asthma, including childhood asthma. So the environmental reasons for opposing inclusion of biomass have to do with carbon emissions, climate change, and other kinds of air pollution. If you're at the far right wing of the environmental movement like I am, you say, well, that's what we said in 2011, it was a good idea then. So finally, what are the 2 principal arguments that are made by the proponents of this bill? And I think everybody here knows that the bill is being promoted by one developer who has a project in mind. He wants to make some money. But the 2 principal arguments are, 1, this bill merely brings net metering in line with the 2004 renewable energy standard, which allowed biomass to be considered renewable energy, and this is just going back to that earlier public policy decision. That argument is correct as far as it goes. We're bringing biomass in just like in the 2004 renewable energy standard. It was a mistake then, it was bad policy then. We tried to fix it in 2011 as pertains net metering, but the argument that, oh, we're just going back to 2004. That's correct. The second argument that you hear from the developer who wants this project is, I'm just going to burn clean wood. Don't worry about C&D waste and lead paint on the wood. And the answer to that is, I suggest not to get into an argument about what this guy may or may not burn in 7 years. Let's assume that he is completely honest and sincere, and he means to burn only clean stuff. The law is opening up the burning of everything, all biomass, clean, dirty, filthy, and otherwise, so that even if this guy were to have a nice project, changing the law for everybody in the world would be a bad public policy thing. So those are my 3 points. Are there questions?
Is the landfill argument a major concern, or?
Okay, so there is another argument, which is we are keeping this biomass out of the landfill. The landfill has only X number of years of limited life, and that's a good thing. That argument, like the going back to 2004 argument, it's true as far as it goes, that if we put stuff into a biomass burner and put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we're not putting stuff into the landfill. But it's not a persuasive argument for supporting the bill. It is saying something that is true, but is largely beside the point with regard to what our primary objections are here.
Could there maybe be other solutions? Like, could this wood be reused? Like, you know how we have a recycling facility? Could there be like a wood recycling?
The clean wood could be reused, and the dirty wood shouldn't be burned in any event.
Exactly, okay.
Another argument that I've heard is that when they're removing forest debris, that it's going to decompose anyway in the forest and it has emissions associated with it there.
You can come up with all sorts of sort of post hoc rationalizations. Now,
it decomposes much more slowly than the wood, so it's like what you would release in an hour of burning might be 10 or 20 years.
And for purposes of context, this is not an argument that will be persuasive with members of the General Assembly, but for purposes of context, there is this other bill pertaining to cutting off renewable energy incentives for projects that are built in forest lands that has exercised many of the environmental groups in ECRI. And there's an irony in this biomass bill, and that is that if it passes, it will further exacerbate the very unpleasant existing controversies about renewable energy siting that will hurt renewable energy developers, it'll hurt environmental groups, and it'll also hurt the environment.
So how persuasive is the argument that this is a kind of pay-to-play kickback for one developer who's a major campaign donor to a lot of important legislators, tens of thousands of dollars donated, and so this is a fast-tracked favor to that donor?
I think that the answer to the question you asked is I don't know how persuasive that argument is. I think that what you're saying is factually accurate, and I think that depending on whom you're talking to, that is a good argument. The common causes of the world who don't like dirty money corrupting politics may find that very persuasive. The climate action Rhode Islands of the world who are concerned about carbon emissions may be more persuaded by the fact that this is producing electricity with more carbon emissions per megawatt hour than fossil fuels. But what you're saying is factually correct, and used selectively with the right people, I think is a sensible argument.
The fact that trees are the only thing that actually cleans carbon out and gives us oxygen back should not be doing anything to eliminate trees.
That is an argument that cuts more than one way. I think.
But I do think there's a point, maybe, I'm interested in your thoughts. The bill that's being discussed that wouldn't allow siting of renewable energy in forests. The opinion, Jerry's opinion and others, is that it doesn't, the way it's written right now, it won't, the net metering program won't be affected by it. It seems to me that we need a deep look at net metering by the state as a whole. We don't want to nitpick little things about the net metering law right now, but the next year we might want to take a look at it and figure out how to do the siting conversation around that law.
The idea of looking at, so let's separate this.
Yep.
First of all, the first thing that Meg said is true, is that the Grow Smart bill that is opposed by ECRI that would cut off state incentives for renewable energy projects sited in forests would not address the largest and most controversially cited renewable energy projects in the state, because net metering is not a state incentive program. There's no state money going, it's not a state incentive. So on that matter, Meg is correct. On the second matter, that having a sensible, holistic, in advance argument about overall net metering policy in the state is a sensible one that I think many enviros would endorse. I want to acknowledge that there are potential risks there as well in terms of getting pushback from anti-renewable energy folk, again, at the risk of being the far right wing of the environmental movement, we were very, very, very thoughtful and cautious when we wrote the 2011 statute, and I would be reluctant just to open it for the sake of opening it, but as part of a wider discussion that looks at multiple things, the environmental community ought always to be willing to re-examine and reevaluate, keeping in mind what our values are and what we're trying to do.
My dream is to live in a world where Jerry Elmer is the extreme right wing.
So I think I've answered the questions that came up on the phone yesterday. As folks know, there is no opportunity for public input participation speaking today. The committee is going to vote. The thought is that the presence of people there, A, conveys that doing something in response to slimy campaign contributions won't be done in secret because everybody's looking, and B, I think may have a salutary effect in the wider context that there's been a lot of communications with members of this committee from multiple environmental groups in the last week, and so our presence at least will be noted. But don't look for the sign-up sheet on this bill because we're not speaking on the bill today.